We already saw how to write for loops in R and also connected them with the concept of vectorization. Let's dig in a bit more on for loops with a few examples in this video. I will also take a better look at the relation between for loops and vectorization with a short comment that is meant to be for a bit more advanced R users. Of course, beginners are also welcome to follow. But before that, let's see a few examples of for loops as promised. The first for loop includes an interesting code block with a single print statement, but this time the printed number is the result of adding the number 1 to the value of the vector vec1 that is assigned to the iteration variable anum. When a new cycle of execution begins, anum takes the next value in the second position of vec1 and the print statement is executed once more. That goes on until the last statement of the vector is reached. What this means is that the life cycle of the iteration variable anum lasts until the whole code block is executed. When a new iteration starts, anum's value is deleted and a new value is assigned to it. That is the reason why these iteration variables are also called local variables. Essentially, their assigned values hold only for a single iteration. After the assignment of the last member of vec1 to anum and the execution of the print statement are done, the execution flow continues to the next line in the program outside the for loop block of code. That is, the print statement in the last line is executed and the string "this is the next line" is printed out on the console. As you can see, the only difference with the previous for loops is that now 1 is added to the iteration variable anum, so the expression within the print statement will be calculated. 1 plus 1 is equal to 2 and the resulting number 2 will be printed out on the console. Let's move on to a more useful scenario of creating a for loop for textual analysis and manipulation. Let's assume that we would like to print out on the console each string of a vector of strings and then the number of characters that it has. Now, after having created a character vector named vec2, I'm using the for loop to print out every element of the character vector vec2 and then its length in terms of characters using the print and the nchar functions. As you can see, within the curly braces in separate lines, I could add as many commands I deem necessary for the task at hand. A very frequent type of language data manipulation scenario is when a specific processing task should be applied only to some members of a vector, or, if you have to do with data frames, to columns or rows that satisfy a specific condition. For instance, you would like to have words that end with a specific suffix or start with another prefix printed out to the console. Or, starting simpler, you would like to have those words of a character vector that are longer or shorter in terms of the number of their characters. These and many other scenarios shout for a combination of a for loop with an embedded if statement, and is perhaps the most common combination of two keywords in many programming languages. Let's write such a block of code to demonstrate what it does. So, I guess this code is easily readable even for a beginner, since the only thing you do is read and interpret what is in front of you. Take each element of vec2 and check if its length is greater or less than 5. If the string is shorter than 5 characters, then print it out on the console. Otherwise, move on to the next element. This otherwise is not written anywhere, but since there is nothing following the if statement within the curly braces of the for loop, the execution moves on to the next value assigned to the iteration variable a string. Now, as promised earlier, I would like to make a comment on the use of vectorization and for loops in R. This is rather going to be a comment for intermediate R users and not so much for R beginners. As mentioned earlier, experienced R users would recommend you to use vectorized operations and avoid for loops. Why is that? Well, vectorization is a built-in feature of the R language, and it allows to apply a function or a comparison of interest element-wise to whole vectors that are loaded to memory at once. That is why vectorization is extremely fast, and the official recommendation by the R community is to use more often vectorized operations than loops. Without getting into details as to how R accesses and organizes pieces in Mac computers' memory, it suffices to say that with vectorization operations, there are some clever ways of loading and processing fast whole container objects of a relatively big size. Having said that, for complex real-world case scenarios, it is too complex to write vectorized code, and that is why for loops are not entirely abandoned. However, as a side note for intermediate R users that R beginners can totally ignore for now, since R prefers a functional way of programming, there are ways to avoid for loops altogether by adopting packages such as purrr. Moreover, a whole suite of tools is provided by tidyverse to traverse through tables such as data frames. Briefly for now, you can think of tidyverse as a set of packages that share a common perspective on how to handle tabular data. It may also be seen as an R dialect with its own rules and patterns that you need to know in order to avoid the need to use for loops altogether. Okay, now, this was not a comment for a beginner's playlist, but it would be useful to at least be informed about the importance of the vectorized operations and its comparison or relation to for loops. Now, it's your turn to try out different use case scenarios with for loops and solve the coding exercise that I prepared for you. Feel free to send me your comment with your solution. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.